and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. That puts us at 1 p.m. on the East Coast, not 1 a.m. That's a little too early for me, although I guess it would only be 10 o'clock my time, but by then I'm in bed asleep. So, and of course, an hour in for Central and Mountain. And we, on this show, we talk about all things related to professional success and wealth building. So today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I don't think I've done a show like this for, gosh, maybe a year and a half or more. Back when I did the studio set version of the Way to Wow show, I did a couple of them on books. Sometimes I had the authors, and other times not. In this case, I'm going to talk about a book that my aunt Nadine introduced me to a number of years ago, and it's a short book, but very powerful. And I remember it to this day and refer back to it. And for those of you who are wondering, what book is this? The book is called The Four Agreements, and it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. I don't frankly know very much about Mr. Ruiz, only that he is, to my mind, very wise. And this book definitely impacted my life. So he calls it a practical guide to personal freedom. So you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with professional success and wealth building? So my guess is that as you look for those things in your life, they're part of a larger desire for personal freedom, the ability to do the things that you want to do, be involved with people you like and trust, and people you love, be engaged in activities that you find stimulating, worthwhile, these kind of things. And so while Don Miguel Ruiz's purpose, I think, is broader than what we talk about here on people making money, I think that it undergirds what it is we're looking to accomplish. So I'm not going to, read from the book. First of all, that would probably be a copyright violation, and I don't want to. I don't want to do that. But also I want to kind of give you my, if you will, spin on it, and how I apply this to my life, because I think that any philosophy that we read about and choose to adopt, we probably don't want to adopt it on someone else's terms, if that makes sense. So I think we have to make it our own. This was a lesson actually I learned early in my business career. There's a sales trainer by the name of Tommy Hopkins. I've mentioned Tommy before. I'll call him Tommy because I've met him. So, and he was a very successful real estate agent here in Southern California, I believe in Orange County, back in the 70s. And he started out with nothing, not knowing anything, and he had to learn how to sell real estate. And eventually he started what he called a sales boot camp. This was before everything was a boot camp. So we're going back decades. And I took his boot camp, I believe it was in the late 1980s. It was in a huge hotel ballroom at a hotel down by Los Angeles International Airport. Thousands of people there. And it was an inspiring experience. One of the messages that Tommy Hopkins really worked to help us absorb was that we had to take what he was teaching us and make it our own. So the idea that we were going to, use it in the same way he did, that was not what he was after. He wasn't trying to make little Tommy Hopkins clones. he was, in my case, for example, trying to help me make a better version of Kevin Bemmel. And so I do think that that is what great teachers do for us. They don't attempt to indoctrinate us into their philosophy. They work with us to absorb new ideas that we then apply to our lives to become more of the person that we seek to be. Certainly, and I'm not saying I'm a great teacher, but that is certainly what I seek to do through my shows. I tell this to my daughter all the time, Lord forbid you become another me. You really don't want to do that. What you want to be is the Madeline Bemmel that you want to be. So there's one other thing I wanted to point out about this book. So in addition to it being a practical guide to personal freedom, Don Miguel Ruiz calls it a Toltec wisdom book. And candidly, I don't know anything about Toltec wisdom other than what I've read in this book. But if that sort of sparks your interest, I encourage you to get your own copy of the book. There will be a link to it in the show notes, an affiliate link, just full disclosure. And it's a short book. It's I think 150 pages basically. So you can see and the pages are small. So you can read this book in a couple of hours at the most in one sitting. It's a great thing on a cold rainy day, sit in front of the fireplace and absorb Don Miguel Ruiz's wisdom. So I'm gonna give you my take on it, and as is my practice, I put together a little presentation on this. So here it is. Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements. So there we go. Okay. So, I'll repeat this, I think, almost every show, for those who may be new. So everything we do here is based on the three pillars of attainment. And while generally speaking on people making money, we're dealing in the pursuits pillar and the finances realm. Today, I think we're really dealing more in the self pillar, and in the identity and mindset realms. So I do think that this philosophy will improve your health because it will improve your mindset, and all of these things work together, of course. But if we're living more integrated lives where we understand ourselves better, I think inevitably we're going to be healthier. And indeed, this philosophy, I think, will also help improve our relationships. So this is a slide here, showing the book that I was just showing you. And I did want to point out, sort of social proof, as they say. So the Four Agreements it was published in 1997, and it sold over 10 million copies in the United States alone. So it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost a decade. And I think this kind of sums it up here. It says everything we do is based on agreements we have made, agreements with ourselves, with other people, with God, and with life. But the most important agreements are the ones we make with ourselves. And while religious people may say, no, the most important agreements we make are with God. Well, we make agreements with God, but the reality is that God is much more forgiving than most people, and so while we make agreements with God, those of us who do make agreements with God, I guess I should say, and they're certainly important. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're not nearly as diligent in keeping those agreements as we ought to be, and yet God, seems to give us grace. So the agreements we make with ourselves are the ones that most impact us on a month by month, year by year, week by week, day by day, even hour by hour, minute by minute basis. And it has a lot to do, they have a lot to do with how we perceive ourselves, how we treat ourselves. And of course, all of that relates to how we treat other people, and therefore the kind of success we're going to have, especially professional success. So I think that's really at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. So here are the 4 agreements. Oh, that's weird. It shifted on us. Okay, well, in any event, I think we can read these. So number 1, be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take anything personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions. And number 4, always do your best. Right? Now, you may look at these and say, well, gosh, my parents taught me some, if not all of these. I think that's true. My dad taught me to be impeccable with my word, and my mother taught me to always do your best. I wish they had taught me don't take anything personally and don't make assumptions. They didn't, but I learned those along the way, and I think all 4 of these put together help us be much more complete, stable people. So in Hebrew, and many of you may have heard this term, shalom. So it's typically used as a greeting, shalom, as in hello, but it's used as a way to say goodbye, shalom. But what shalom really means is, and you also hear shalom used to mean peace, as in peacefulness. What shalom really means at its root is wholeness. And when are we at peace? When we feel whole, WHOLE. And so when we greet someone by saying shalom, we're actually not saying hello or goodbye. What we're saying in essence is like, peace be upon you. And literally what we're saying is, may you be whole, right? And imagine a world where more often than not, we feel whole. So if that is if that is something that we seek, so I think these 4 agreements, and these are agreements we make with ourselves. They're not agreements we make with the world per se. Okay, they're agreements we make with ourselves. So I agree that I'm going to be impeccable with my word. I agree that I'm not going to take anything personally. I agree that I'm not going to make assumptions, and I agree to always do my best. Those are the agreements we make with ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to go into each one of these in more depth now. And I say again, this is how I this is how I've internalized them, if you will. You won't necessarily find these ideas in Don Miguel Ruiz's book, but what I'm hoping to show you is the process by which you can really make this book, this philosophy, a part of yourself. Okay, so number 1, be impeccable with your word. So I think, words, I in some way, I think words have gotten cheapened in our society, and certainly they seem to have gotten coarsened. So, for example, when I was, a child, a teenager, you would never hear profanity used on television. Or radio for that matter. You did in the movies if it was like a PG-13 movie or something like that, or an R-rated movie, of course. But today you will hear coarse language pretty much anywhere, and I would argue that that this coarsening of the use of words is having a negative impact on us, and on our society, but primarily it's on each one of us as an individual. So this is going to sound judgmental, I suppose, but uh, the English language in particular is such a descriptive language. I've forgotten how many words there are in it. I think there's something like a million words or 2 million words. I mean, it's hugely descriptive language. As opposed to Hebrew, which I don't want to say Hebrew's not descriptive, but the number of root words in Hebrew is like 22,000. Okay, so one word, it can be used in many different contexts. Now, Hebrew is a spiritual language, and it so underpinning it is are spiritual concepts. English is meant to be a very descriptive. And it's well, I don't know. It's meant to be. It's grown into be a very descriptive, precise, almost scientific language. Okay. Now, the reason I say all these things is words are not just important, words have power. So, speaking from a religious standpoint for a moment, there's a philosophy or an idea in Judaism that the story in Genesis where and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and the God separated the darkness from the light, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there's an idea that that statement is meant literally. So God used words to create the world. Okay. And prior to using those words, and of course, there's a whole discussion here about how does God use words? God is not, corporeal. He has no body. At least the Father in heaven has no body, or never has had a body. I think those kind of questions are best, discussed over a bourbon or a nice glass of wine. But the fundamental idea behind, or the fundamental philosophy behind this idea is the power of words. When we speak something, we are either creating or destroying. Okay, and so when we say be impeccable with your word, what we're saying, I mean, in this case, we're talking about word as a proxy for doing what you say, right? Be impeccable with, following through, if you will. Okay. But I also, in my mind, I expand this to be careful with your maybe words. Okay. If you're going to say something, take responsibility for what you've said. That's part of being impeccable with your words. Okay. So, people these days, I think, have been habituated to saying oftentimes some very egregious things. Okay. And then, someone says something egregious back to them, and they're offended that the person says something egregious back to them. It's like, well, you're getting as you're giving. So if you don't want to be attacked like that, then don't attack people. Be impeccable with your word. Okay. So so that's a fundamental part of this by me. Is like, in essence, I I speak to people the way I want to be spoken to. That's part of me being impeccable with my word, right? Um, and that's a sort of a sub agreement, if you will, of this idea of, I've agreed to be impeccable with my word. Okay, so uh, without sin. Shoot, I'm trying to remember why I put this in here. Okay, so um, uh, mm, I've gone up in that. I'm not going to spend time remembering it. So Another part of this is gossip. So, for those of you who are, regular watchers of the show, I've talked about this idea of gossip, or what's called in Hebrew lashon hora, which means like the evil tongue or the evil mouth, evil language. Okay, so if we're impeccable with our word, okay, we don't go around in public saying terrible things about people, even if they're true. Okay. Now, we may know something bad about another person, and we may, like, for example, we may know that when it comes to business dealings, they're dishonest. Okay. And we may know someone who's contemplating, going into business with this person. Okay. So to go to that person and say, I understand you're thinking about going into business with this other person. I just need to tell you something about him for you to take into account. Okay. Now that's not gossip. In that case, you're trying to prevent somebody from being harmed. Okay. But to broadcast that about the person, just, to whomever, might hear it, whether they have a reason to know it or not, that already rises to the level of gossip. Okay. And that is, I would argue, not being impeccable with your word. Okay. So in the end, we can use our word to create bonds or create a club. Okay. You see this in particular when people say, a person will say a terrible thing to someone else, and then they'll say, I'm just being honest. Right? They're essentially using the truth to club the person and make them, hurt them in essence. Okay. So again, I would argue that's not being impeccable with your word. Okay. Is this really what you want to be doing in the world? Okay. Or is your word more valuable than that, so that when you say something, it really can be relied by other people, and it's something that can be used to create and it affects the creation of bonds with other people. Okay. So be impeccable with your word. Do what you say. Don't say it unless you're going to follow through, and be careful how you express it. Okay? Be impeccable with your word. Okay, next. Don't take anything personally. So I've had this conversation with a number of people, including my daughter. I think it's one of the most important lessons that we can absorb. And that is, people who we don't know will sometimes, and if we're in the public eye, maybe oftentimes, say terrible things about us. And my question is, why does that matter? That person knows nothing about us, even if we're in the public eye. Okay, all they know is what we present in public. They know little, if anything, about our private lives. They probably know little, if anything, about our values. Okay, especially for an entertainer, right? We're playing a part. So, you I don't know any, current current popular culture, so I'm not going to speak to that. But you take the example of the movie that leaps to mind is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. It's one of the great Humphrey Bogart movies, right? And he plays a pretty villainous character in the movie. Actually, I'm sorry. I've got a better example. It just leaped to mind. So when I was a younger guy, there was a very popular comedian around by the name of Don Rickles, and Don Rickles' comedy was based on insulting other people. And back when I was younger, I really did not like Don Rickles' comedy. It offended me. Okay, and then a little bit later in life, I learned that Don Rickles was one of the nicest, sweetest, most loyal, and most giving people in the entertainment business. And I think I saw a roast of him, and of course, in a roast, people come up and they make fun of the person being roasted. But usually, well, not usually, but oftentimes, at the end of their shtick that they do, they sort of step out of the roasting role and they talk about who the person truly is. And what was amazing about Don Rickles is how many people said that despite what you see on the stage, this is just a fundamentally decent, giving man, right? So here's someone who is in the public eye really his whole life, and to judge him on his comedy was a big mistake. Was a big mistake. So to let strangers have an impact on how we perceive ourselves, I think is an equally big mistake. They know nothing about us. They're just taking pot shots. Okay? And they're trying to get under our skin. Their attempt to do that says far more about them, their own self-perception, their own insecurities, than it says about us. Because it says nothing about us. They know nothing about us. Now, you might say, well, but what if my spouse says something horrible about us, or about me? Well, okay, yeah, that can hurt. Okay? That can hurt. And this goes into the next point, choosing to be hurt. Fundamentally, we decide whether we're going to let words hurt us. Right? If you recall the old saying, I think from when I was a kid, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. Okay. Now, I've had people tell me, and I've thought from time to time that, well, words can be very harmful. And the truth of the matter is, yes, they can be very harmful if we choose to let them be harmful. That's the key. Okay. So the fact that people say hurtful things, that people who know us say hurtful things about us, okay, hopefully we can train ourselves. And I'll admit, I'm I'm much better about letting strangers, insults roll off my back than insults that come from people who know me, especially people who claim to care about me. But we can listen to what they say and try and, in essence, climb behind it and figure out, why are they saying this to me? Okay? Why are they trying to hurt me? This person supposedly cares about me. Why are they trying to hurt me? Okay. And oftentimes I think what we'll find is that that person is hurting, and in their pain, they're lashing out at us. So if we can choose to not be hurt by what this person says, we will be in a better position to help them. Okay? And if we can help them, then perhaps they're going to see that their lashing out at us was uncalled for or unjustified. And in the end, our relationship will become closer. And hopefully that person will learn a better way to approach us. So rather than attacking us when they're feeling awful, maybe they'll come to us and say, I'm feeling awful, and I don't want to attack you. Maybe like what happened last time, and I just don't know what to do. I feel so angry, right? Obviously, that's a better way to deal with the situation than to, throw anger at someone we care about, right? Upsetting them, and then we get into a fight and all of that kind of thing, right? So it is true, we choose to be hurt. Now, it can be difficult to choose not to be hurt, but just because a choice is difficult doesn't mean that it's not a choice. Okay? And I think we need to keep that in mind, right? Many times choosing the best path, if you will, can be very difficult. Okay? But in this particular agreement we have with ourselves, I think it's crucial. Okay? We exercise that kind of self-discipline. Okay? And finally, so this is what leads to authenticity. Okay. Now, by the way, if you want to be the kind of person who egregiously attacks other people, strangers or people and maybe care about, okay, I guess that's that's being authentic, right? Um, and if you want to be the kind of person um, whose emotional well-being is subject to what strangers, say to you. So then I guess taking things personally leads you to your authentic self. But to the extent that we want to be self-possessed people, so not taking anything personally will lead us to a greater sense of authenticity. Okay? So if a stranger insults me, I can just smile and go on my way. That's all. Don't have to let them change me from who I truly want to be, which is someone who can create durable bonds with other people for our mutual benefit. Okay? All right. Next. Don't make assumptions. Okay? I think we see this a lot today. So somebody will say something, and we will assume that they mean, whatever it is we think that they mean. Okay? And we take our interpretation as being the truth of what they've said. Okay? So I'm trying to think of an example. Well, gosh, when is it coming to me? I had one prepared and I lost it. But so I want to create something good that's not political, frankly. So oh, okay. So here's one. Um, I was uh, uh, someone I know and I were texting yesterday evening. Okay, and um, and the person asked me a couple of questions, and I responded to the questions, and I never got a response back. And and my initial assumption was, oh, I wonder if those answers offended this person. It's not someone I know particularly well, but the first thing I leapt to was, oh gosh, I think I must have offended this person, and I could almost feel my mind making that the truth. Okay. But in the reality, I have no idea why the person didn't respond. Okay. Person might have gotten distracted. The person might have, I don't know, fallen asleep. The person might have had an engagement that had to be taken care of. Okay. Or maybe the person was offended by what I said. I mean, I hope not. I thought it was pretty, I don't know why, but, I seemed, just pretty neutral to me. Okay. But maybe, but my assumptions about what was going on do not in any way, shape, or form necessarily lead me to the truth. My assumptions, my assumption might have been the truth, but I have no way of knowing that. Okay. So I don't know, maybe I'll hear from the person today or tomorrow or whatever. And, the person might, oh, sorry, you know, I fell asleep, okay. No harm, no foul. Right. So if we can avoid making assumptions, we can avoid hurting ourselves. Okay. Because, well, or we can avoid hurting other people, or both. Right. So in my case, the assumption was a self-critical assumption. Oh, I did something wrong. Okay. But another person in the same situation might have said, well, this person's arrogant, asked me questions, I respond, and then, nothing. Like, how arrogant is this person? It's like, that assumption is no more correct necessarily than mine was. And knowing the person, I mean, that's why I didn't, have that assumption. Okay. So what we assume and what the truth is oftentimes are very different things. And the idea that somehow we know better, or we have such profound insight into other people or into different things that happen in our lives, we're leading ourselves down the golden path, as the saying goes. Okay, so how do we avoid making assumptions then? And to do that, I think we need to ask questions. So if something happens that causes us to kind of, what's going on here? Scratch your head. I don't understand what's going on here. So rather than making assumptions, ask questions. Okay. So for example, I could have sent a message to the person, saying, are you there? Or did I say something that offended you? And frankly, I was tired, and I think I fell asleep shortly thereafter. So, I didn't follow up with any questions. Okay. And frankly, it's not a big thing, one way or the other. If it had been, a more crucial situation, then, I think the best response for me would have been to ask questions. Okay. Now, keep in mind, I could have asked questions and still gotten no response. That still wouldn't have meant that my assumption was, my initial assumption was correct. The person could have fallen asleep, so I could ask questions all night. The person's asleep, that kind of thing. Right. So, what might be a better thing is like if you're face to face, well then clearly you can continue to be engaged, and you can ask questions, clarify, make sure you understand what the person really means. Okay. Or what they really meant by a particular action. Now, and this is why, things like texting and email can be somewhat problematic, because we're not engaged face to face. And so there's kind of a big incentive, almost, if you will, to, to make assumptions and all of that. And that's not a good practice. Okay. So third agreement, don't make assumptions. Okay. Fourth, agreement number 4, always do your best. Okay. I would argue this should be the standard for performance in our lives. Okay. We should renounce perfection. Okay. We're never going to be perfect. We're human beings. We're never going to be perfect. And the desire to be perfect seems to lead to stasis, the inability to act or speak or whatever, as it does to encouraging us to, become ever more perfect. I think we're far more likely to become better if we strive to always do our best in any particular situation. This is a lesson that I'm you know I wish I could like inject it into my daughter that she would, teenagers, I think a lot of teenagers are like this. They think they have to be perfect because, teenagers can be very mean to each other. And so it seems like, well, but if I can only be perfect, then everybody will like me. No one will be mean to me and all that kind of stuff. And of course, that's not the case. Any of you who've gone through high school, that's not the case. This is just the human condition. So I think the pursuit of perfection is as likely to cause us to experience emotional pain, and also to cause us to not be able to improve as it is to motivate us to improve. Rather, I think Don Miguel Ruiz is correct. What we should strive for is to always do our best. Okay? Now, what our best is going to change from moment to moment. Okay? So right now, I'm, pretty well rested. I had my cup of coffee, my cup of decaf. I know that sounds very geriatric. I've had my cup of decaf, and I feel strong and all that kind of stuff. And so the the performance I can give is a best performance is better than it would be if I had to do this show at, say, 6 p.m. my time, when I've been up already for 12 hours. I've been working all day. I'm tired, may have gotten sort of, buffeted about by, daily life or whatever. Okay. So my best at that moment is not going to be the same as my best right now. It just isn't. Okay. And one of the reasons why I do my shows at 10 a.m. my time is so that I'm more likely to be, in a mindset of resilience and openness and all those kind of things that will allow me to do my best, if you will. Okay. And so always doing our best, I think, also means treating ourselves with a little bit of grace and understanding how do I define my best at this moment in time? Okay. So it's very easy to be disappointed in ourselves. And sometimes, by the way, we don't do our best. That is the reality of it. Okay. So we didn't do our best. How can we improve for next time? That's the underlying question behind fulfilling the agreement to always do our best. Okay. If I did a sub-best performance, how can I create a situation where I'm more likely to do my best next time? Okay. So I was in a very long meeting yesterday, over 4 hours. And, after I got done with the meeting, I was driving back home. And one of the things I did is I went over in my mind, Kevin, how did you do? Did you do your best? Could you have done better? Okay. Now, part of knowing what my best was understanding what was my goal or goals for the meeting. Okay. And as I reflected on that, I concluded that I think I did a respectable job. Was it my absolute best? Not sure. I think there were a couple things that I did that, if I had it to do over again, kind of thing, I might, do differently. But overall, I think I don't have any reason to, castigate myself. I'll put it to you that way. Okay. Now, as the meeting wore on, it got harder for me to do my best because it was exhausting. Okay. And for an introvert like me, being in a meeting with several people pulls energy out of me. So the longer I'm in a meeting like that, the harder it is for me to do my best. For extroverts, they draw energy from other people. Okay. And so in many ways, being around people, they get stronger because they're pulling more and more energy. Now, fortunately, I think everyone in the meeting were fairly introverted in that sense. And so, you know, we weren't pulling a lot of energy from each other. And I think that's why overall the meeting went pretty well. At one point, there was somebody in the meeting who I think was very extroverted, and I could feel him sort of pulling energy out of me. Now it was okay. It was toward the beginning of the meeting, and it worked out well. And he and the other fellow he was there with were very pleased by what we discussed and all of that. So fine. But we need to be aware of some of these dynamics about ourselves in order to optimize our performance. Okay. Now, this is the last point I'm going to make here, and that is reject suffering and choose happiness. What I've found, generally speaking, is people who pursue perfection are seeking suffering because no matter what they do not perform perfectly, and so they're unhappy with themselves. And in essence, they're forcing themselves to suffer because of the standard that they've set. And I think that's unfortunate. If we choose to always do our best, while we will at times fall short of that standard, okay, we can say, okay, how did I fall short? What lessons do I have for next time? And rather than suffering, we can be content, if not happy, with our performance, and sort of, live to fight emotionally, at least another day, or live to interact with people another day. So that's what I mean by reject suffering and choose happiness. Find your way of doing your best in a manner that will support yourself emotionally. Okay. Okay. Now, I had a conversation with a friend. I don't know. I think it was this week, or early this week, or maybe it was last week. I don't recall exactly now. And we were talking about this idea of pursuing perfection. And he was fairly committed to the idea that the pursuit of perfection motivated him. So, okay. I mean, I'm not going to argue if that's what he believes. Fine. I mean, I don't argue beliefs. Okay. As we continued the discussion, though, he differentiated between pursuing perfection and this idea of achieving perfection. So he agreed that the idea of achieving perfection is silly. We're not going to achieve perfection. But for him to articulate it as the pursuit of perfection, that motivates him to be in sort of continually trying to improve mode. Okay. I mean, I can hear that distinction. So for me, I find I get too caught up in this idea of being perfect by using the concept of perfection. Okay. But look, how you articulate these ideas to yourself, I mean, do it in a way that most empowers you. And again, I'm showing you how I've absorbed this material, but that's not to say that you should absorb it in the same way. Okay. So the fourth agreement: always do your best. All right, and that I think that's it, right? Yep. Here we go. So if you have any questions, comments, especially if you disagree with something that I said, always like to hear why people disagree with me. And you can post a comment in any of our social media, or if it's something private, you can send me an email. I'm happy to email with you and hear your ideas and perhaps share them on a future show. So if there's something you disagree with and I think that it's something that I think other people ought to hear, I'm happy to mention that on a future show and with your permission even cite you as being the source for this different idea. Okay, so here we go, and then we have our legal stuff, which you've seen. We'll go ahead and close the presentation. So I'm going to wrap up the show a little bit early today. There's no point in sort of dragging things out just for the sake of uniform length of time. But I do thank you for tuning in and watching. And I recommend you read Don Miguel Ruiz's book. Very, very powerful. And because it's so short, it is the kind of book that you can reread periodically and get more out of each time you read the book again. So thanks again for tuning in. This show wraps up our week. So I'm going to wish you a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. I'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time with Trust and Estates Weekly. My guest is going to be Mary Jane Charles, and she has written a book called The Business of Dying. And I encourage you to tune in and listen to Mary Jane's perspective and hear her story, especially if you have a rather modest estate. So Mary Jane's book and her perspective, I think, will help you a lot because she's going to sort of give you the ability to do your estate planning on your own, or mostly on your own, with maybe a minimal of cost and need for consulting with potentially expensive professionals. So again, do tune in and join us at 10 a.m. Pacific time Monday morning for Trust and Estates Weekly. Tuesday of next week at 10 a.m. Business Lessons from the Military, and then a week from today for the next edition of People Making Money. So wishing you again a wonderful day and rest of the week, and signing off. Marie, you are my bell. All the best, folks.